Hello YouTube. In this video I'm going to be talking about fasting, especially in the context of Lent and Ramadan. Because Ramadan is tomorrow and I know that a lot of people can use some advice because you wish to continue training and improving the body. And that is fine and possible, and I have some great tips for you guys. But before I dive into that topic, I want to discuss fasting for a bit. So, fasting is pretty much something that we all do to an extent. And if you fast, you've heard the joke of people who tell you that they fast as well because they also don't sleep throughout the night. And that is true. We go through phases of fasting as humans, whether we like it or not, because we're not constantly eating. And that is healthy and normal. And depending on who you are, those fasting periods can be quite large. For someone like me who doesn't have many meals throughout the day, I have a fasting window of 12, sometimes 14 hours between the time I go to bed and the time I have my first meal, because it's the way my body works. I'm not super hungry when I just woke up. I don't necessarily eat right before going to bed. So that's the period of time where I'm not going to be consuming any calories. That can vary from people to people. I know people who need a ton of calories very early on in the day, or else they don't feel energetic. Some people are going to need most of their calories during lunch or during the afternoon. It really is a case-by-case thing, and there is no such thing as a method that is going to fit everyone's needs. That being said, as someone who trains, you want to meet two prerequisites. You want to make sure that the pre-workout meals, the ones that are going to consume before the training, are sufficient to sustain effort, and then you want to make sure that the meals after the effort are sufficient to sustain recovery. And that is the endless cycle of muscle gains. If those two are taken care of, you will be good. And that's where fasting comes into play. Because if you have large periods of time where you're fasting, it means that one or two, or maybe the two of them at the same time, will be impacted. And it still doesn't mean that it's going to be bad. Because, and this is something I want you to take to heart, your body is not so weak that it would just fall apart because you're not eating. Your body has reserves, your body knows exactly how to utilize the reserves, and depending on how you treat the body, it has more or less of an ability to do so. Some people will be much better at mobilizing fat storage than others. This is when you hear these myths about, if you don't eat enough and then you eat a ton, you're going to refeed and you're going to go into starvation mode, meaning that your body is going to start storing all of that fat. That, across the board, is an excuse used by fat people to justify why they're not eating salads. But there is some truth to it, meaning that at some point you reach a stage where the body, when it's being rebounded on, meaning that you're giving it a ton of calories back from a fast, will do something with it depending on its stage, on the nutrition you intake, the nutrients you intake rather, and just the body's ability to work with what you give it. Two people who consume the same amount of proteins, carbs, and calories will have different results because one could be training more, one could stimulate their muscle more, one could be more anabolic, one could have a better cardiovascular system, one could have a better ability to actually intake some calories that are not going to be turned directly into fat because they will be spending it doing cardio or training, etc. All of that needs to be taken into account because with fasting, I see too many advice being given as one size fits all, and it really isn't because fasting is case by case, as I explained. So, for the benefits of fasting, I'm not the science guy, I'm not going to cite studies, I'm just going to tell you what I saw. I hear people say that fasting can help lose fat, and that is true, but not in the way people think, meaning that just because you're not eating doesn't mean that your body is suddenly going to say, okay, I'm going to prioritize the fat and I'm going to just get rid of all of that fat. It doesn't work like that. There is a hard limit. Yes, not consuming calories in the moment can help losing fat in the long term, but it's because you're going to accumulate a large amount of caloric deficit over time. It's not the action of not eating that's provoking the fat loss. It's the action of compounding the windows of time when you're not eating that puts you in a deficit. So essentially, fasting is a tool to lose weight. And is it going to be good weight? For the most part, yeah, you're going to lose that fat that you want to lose. But keep in mind, you could have done the same thing with a caloric deficit without fasting. in return, understand also that in truth, a caloric deficit is a type of fast. You are doing, instead of doing a frequency fast, you're doing a volume fast. So instead of not eating for a period of time, you reduce the amount you eat throughout the periods of time. But in reality, at the end of the day, it's still a caloric deficit because fasting is not magical, at least for the body. Yes, I've heard those people who say that it metabolizes fat. I've heard those people who say that it helps with growth hormone production. I personally think that this is bogus, and even if it's the case, it's so minimal that the real benefits of fasting are not found there. The true power of fasting is in the spiritual, meaning that it is an extremely convenient way to lose weight and to control calories if and only if the spiritual and the mind can take it. And if it can, not only do you get the benefits of the fast because it facilitates the caloric deficit, it's going to toughen you up as well. And that might be the best thing about it. So, to go back to my little list, you won't lose gains. That's important with fasting. People go crazy about it, and that's, I blame that entirely on all of the supplement companies and their cronies who sell you protein powders, who sell you, I've seen carbs powders, like powderized pasta and rice. Carbs is the cheapest stuff. Why do you buy it in powder form? They sell it for 10 times the market value. But point being, you don't need to constantly eat or drink shakes to be good. Even if you're catabolic, you're not gonna die. Your body is not stupid. When you are in a state of deprivation, the body doesn't immediately think, okay, it's time to just eat the muscles up. I'm going to cannibalize the entirety of the muscle groups. No, it doesn't want to do that. Your muscles are the thing that move the body. They are survival and primordial part of the body. The entirety of the system knows that they should not be utilized in that manner. Plus, if you look at the equation, muscles take a long time to build, but when they're being cannibalized, as I said, they really don't bring that many calories in the system. Fat, on the other hand, is highly easy to mobilize. It brings tons of calories, and it's easy to replace. So it makes a ton of sense that from an evolutionary standpoint, the body would be much more keen towards actually attacking the fat reserves. Understand also that if you push the ball too far and you starve, for example, for real, at some point, you're going to enter what is called autophagy, which means the body starts attacking the muscle for real because it has nothing else to attack. But that is really, really deep into a fast, and most likely you will never get there, so don't worry about it. However, what can be true is that if you fast too intensely, you're not going to be able to perform in the gym, which in the long term results in muscle loss. That's where the muscle loss is going to come. It's that you're not performant anymore, you're not giving the muscle the stimulus it needs anymore. Maybe, and I don't think that's true, maybe the recovery aspect is also impacted because you don't eat as much and you suffer. But keep in mind also that fasting for many people doesn't mean entering a strikingly low caloric deficit. It just means that you're going to give yourself time throughout the day to not eat, build up appetite, and then when it's time to eat, you will find that by controlling the window, you will be able to eat less. And I'm going to get to that. But before, I just want to say also that I've heard that people say that fasting kills some cells, some cancer cells. I am not sharp enough to tell you if that's true or not. It might be, it makes sense to me, but at the end of the day, it might be minimal. So unless it's a practice that you do throughout your life, I don't see if you're going to get really good results from that. So, as I said, you are going to be able to control your caloric intake via fasting. And the reason why this works so well is because the appetite you build throughout the day not eating will not be fully mobilized when you finally eat, because the body has a slight mismatch between the appetite and the intake of food to satiate the appetite. What I mean by it is, if you're hungry and you immediately eat, like the second you feel that hunger pang, you eat. One, you're teaching your body that the second it rings the bell, you're going to feed it, which is bad habits. And two, you might overeat because you have that much appetite, okay? And you're going to eat that much. And you think, oh, but that's not a big discrepancy. Well, it builds up. So over time, these are the type of people whose appetite doesn't match their caloric intake and they intake way too much. So that's no bueno. If you wait for the appetite to be build up enough that you are actually hungry for a meal. You might be able to match it so that you are now at maintenance, and that's great. And for fasting, if you wait for it to be built up enough, you're going to find out that you will not be able to eat enough food to match the appetite, meaning that you're going to eventually get to a level of food that will mean that this here is completely calmed down, but you have now a depth, meaning that the appetite represents on the other axis the amount of calories you should have taken to be able to actually be in maintenance. And that's a good thing for people who want to lose weight. You go in with that big appetite. If you know what you're doing and you eat a lot of proteins, you eat a lot of food that satiate you, you're going to be full and happy, and you still have calories to go. So you're now in a deficit, and you pretty much did something that I already prescribed and described, which is you moved the frequency aspect into the volume aspect, meaning that by not eating a ton throughout the day and suffering that fast, when it's time to eat, you reduced the volume of food you ate. That can be a good approach for some people. For some people, they would much rather do that and actually have to limit their portions and still feel hungry after a meal. Some people cannot deal with that, and I understand. That is especially true with individuals who need to have a full belly before they go to bed, or they can't sleep. Let me tell you this, if you absolutely have to be in a caloric deficit for reason X or Y, and you know it's going to impact your quality of sleep, fast, have a big meal before bed and sleep, because the recovery aspect you get throughout the sleep is more important than the suffering you'll get through the fasting. I can tell you that, it's a good thing. Some people like me, it's cultural, I was raised like this, going to bed hungry, we call that having sleep for dinner. That was normal, and now I'm pretty much set on that. I can go to bed with a grumbling stomach, I fall asleep, I wake up, I'm not even hungry. Some people can't. So if you can't, fasting is for you, it's actually a really good thing. In terms of the windows, as I said, you control the window. So if you look at your day, it's a full day, this is the window of fasting, you move it throughout the day. Some people extend the window throughout the entire day. So they do a full day of fasting, a full day of eating, a full day of fasting, etc., etc. That has all of the benefits that I already described, plus all of the negatives as well. They're all amplified in a sense. The thing if you do that, however, is that you will find that on the days where you fully fast, you might enter a stage where training on those days will be really difficult. And I'm going to talk about that when I talk about Ramadan and I give you advice, but this could impact performance. So if you do that, make sure to match the training days outside of these windows. You want to train on days where you're full and energetic. Doesn't mean that you need to be in that state to train, but your training sessions will be much more optimum if you do that. And then to finish with that, as I said, appetite control. You can reteach and you can teach the body and the appetite to get back to a normal stage. I went to a stage where I booked up way too much and my appetite was out of whack because I ate too much. And therefore, as I said, I explained with the gouges before, my appetite was here, my caloric intake that I needed to maintain was here, but the appetite constantly forced me to be in a caloric surplus because if I wasn't, I was miserable and hungry. And the only thing that managed to get me out of that cycle was to fast. By fasting, I managed to bring the appetite down and I managed to domesticate, I managed to keep under control the appetite that was completely running rampant. And so this could be also a good thing for you. Now, as a counter argument of this, also understand that if you're the type of person who needs to eat and you need a lot of calories and you struggle to meet them, fasting is not for you. Okay, it's going to make it really hard for the same reason that I explained before is if you have to stick all of your calories and macros in one meal, chances are you're not going to be able to do it. So that's going to be a challenge that you can just avoid completely by not fasting or reducing the window of fast for just the breakfast after you wake up. So that's for fasting in general. If you have any more questions, let me know. Now we're going to get into more of the spiritual aspect of it, and I'm going to be talking about Ramadan and Lent, both. But first, let me start with Ramadan because it's actually starting tomorrow, and Ramadan Mubarak to all of the Muslim followers on this channel. So, the first thing that I'm going to touch briefly because I'm not Muslim is spirituality. You fast throughout the day to fill the hunger of the poor, of the homeless, to become more humble, and to create a deeper connection with God, with yourself, which in reality means with God. And that is commendable. It is great if you do it like this. Keep in mind that this should be at the center of your Ramadan. I know, who am I to tell you what to do? I'm just saying that from the outside perspective, that's what it should look like. This is the goal. It's to elevate yourself. And you know yourself that Ramadan is not just fasting. You have to be kind with people, respectful. You have to take yourself away from toxic situations and from toxic influences, etc. So, that, as I said, is, in my opinion, the best thing with fasting. It's the spiritual strength you're going to be able to impact onto your life. And that goes for anyone, not just Muslims, Christians. I mean, every religion fasts to an extent or another. It's a mortification of the self. And pain is something that we avoid as a species because it is directly linked to death. And yet, when we inflict pain on ourselves in a controlled fashion, we're able to transcend our conditions as animals, and that is beautiful. So keep that aspect in mind and prioritize that aspect, and you will find that if you keep that in mind, all of the hunger and all of the byproducts that are not so pleasurable are going to just go away because your mind will be fixated on the right thing. It's going, as I said also, the displeasures, it's going to take a toll on the body. It's not just going to be physical sensations. You are going to be weaker. You are going to be limited and diminished a little bit when you fast. But I'm going to give you tips to reduce that to a minimum because you don't have to. The suffering will still be there. I'm not going to remove the suffering because it would remove the cause and the interest of the practice, but I'm going to make sure that you can still be performant. And also keep in mind that those restrictions are as such. You don't eat from, if I am not mistaken, from sunset to sundown, and you eat afterwards. If you are following any other method or teachings of Ramadan, maybe this video can help, but I'm going to be talking to people who do that and who actually do that, not people who drink throughout the day or taking some snacks here and there, people who actually fast and follow the teachings. And that also goes for Lent. But Lent I'm going to cover at the end of the video. So, for Ramadan, first we're going to be talking about the timing because, as I said, you are being imposed a window of time where you have to fast. It's not up to you. But in reality, this makes it easier because you can now work around the window. So, you know that you're not going to be able to eat or drink throughout the day. This means that you're going to have to find a way to pack calories at a such high rate that you're going to be able to make it through the day. Because if you're not, you're going to crash. What I want to make sure that you do in this case is look at your schedule. Look at when you train. Where should you be training during Ramadan? Where does it make the most sense? At night? I don't think so, because it's going to be at the end of a long day with no resources. Your performance is going to be terrible. What you want is you want to train in the morning. You want to train 3 to 4 hours, maybe even just 2 to 3 hours after you took your last meal, which means I'm going to also ask you to wake up earlier so that you can get your last meal. And I mean, if you're serious about it and it's your 15th Ramadan, you already do that. People who get all of their calories at when it's time to break the fast right after sunset and then just sleep and wake up, they tend to not be able to make it through Ramadan and take to break the fast. And the more experienced fasters know that you have to get another meal right before it ends. So if you already do that, great. Now I'm going to tell you what you're supposed to do, but before, as I said, the training session should be taking place in the morning. And even if you have to wake up early, I can tell you it's going to be worth it because it's going to make it easier to be performant. So the meal I want you to take before you train is not proteins and it's not fats. You're going to intake carbs. It can be pasta, it can be rice, it can be whatever carbs you want, but I like those two the best. What you want, when you cook them, you want to cook them and make sure that they retain a lot of water. You want pastas that are not al dente. You want them to be a little bit soft, not dissolving, but a little bit soft. And same for the rice, you want sticky rice that has a lot of moisture in it. The reason why is, not only are you going to intake a lot of carbs that are going to carry you through the day and through the workout, you're going to take in a ton of water. And that is exceptionally important for your ability to be performing throughout the day. So, random numbers, okay? Let's say Ramadan starts at 6:30 a.m. At 6 a.m., you put your alarm clock, you have your meal, you pre-prep the meal. Don't make the food as you just woke up. Have it in Tupperwares, have your meal. As you eat, you're going to have a glass of water and you drink the water with it. If you can put some sea salt in the water to help with the absorption and to help with the sodium levels in your body, do it. Don't overdo it, of course, but just a tiny bit, just enough. And of course, you're going to also salt the water of the rice and the pasta. If you have to go back to bed after that because of your schedule, so be it, but you'll have that meal in. By the time it's, I want to say, 8:39, this is the perfect moment for you to train. You can train before if you're the type of person who can train with a full stomach. But most likely, if you are working or if you are in school, this is the moment where you're not going to be able to train because you're actually being active. But as I said, if you can train right before your work day, do it. In which case, take the period of time I just described and move it back. Wake up at 4 a.m., get your pasta and everything, go back to bed, wake up at 6, train, and then go and do your job and etc. If you can't do that, you are going to train during your lunch break. It's the only moment I can tell you to train. Or worst case scenario, you train right after you get off work, but really first thing, but I don't recommend it. It would be better if, let's say, you have a schedule that makes you finish work or class around 3 p.m. But you don't want to be training at like 5, 6, 7, because by that point, you already know it, you are going to be dehydrated. So be careful, don't train dehydrated, it's a recipe for disaster. So you have your training there, you have your meal there. Okay, that's taken care of. Now we're going to be talking about the after gym recovery, because as I said, it's important to have your the meal before and the meal after. So you had your training in the morning or at lunch, and all throughout the day you fasted. Now you're really hungry. Okay, you built up hunger, and you might tell me, okay, bro, you told me not to train at night, but man, now you made me train in the morning. I built up appetite, and now I had to suffer through it throughout the day. Yes, you had to, but keep in mind one thing. If you move the workout, at the end of the day, you're going to have to train when you're hungry and when you're thirsty, and you know it's not going to work. On top of that, even though you had to suffer throughout the day, maybe a little bit more than you would have, that is made up by the suffering you would have had to endure throughout the workout. And at the end of the day, it also helps you focus on the spiritual. You got rid of the physical in the morning. Now you can focus on the elevation of the spirit, on your connection with God, on your prayers. This is important. Don't let the thought of the workout parasite the rest of the day. The rest of the day is supposed to be focused on the elevation of the mind, as I said. So that's really important to follow. As you go to bed, before you go to bed, you're also going to have your meal. You break the fast at night. So you finish the fast and now you're going to eat. What do you eat? You're going to, for that first meal, you're going to try and prioritize foods that are going to be high in micronutrients and macros in general. But you have to be smart with it. I suggest to trick your appetite to try and start the meal with something like, for example, proteins, good fats, because they have a high satiating effect, but it doesn't kick in immediately and they don't really make you feel full. Don't make the mistake of stuffing your face with pasta or with couscous the second the fast is broken. I would tell you to try and split the carbs and the proteins. That way you will find that when you're full, like you just ate a ton of good chicken, you still have space for pasta and couscous. You do. And that's when you can really stuff your face with that stuff that's high in calories. And that is the order I tell you to follow. One thing to keep in mind again, as a non-Muslim, the goal of Ramadan again is to understand the way people who don't have food feel. And that connects directly to the idea that you're not going to be in a caloric surplus. And yet, I know many Muslim brothers who end up gaining weight during Ramadan, but it's not good weight, they gain fat. And the reason why is they stuff their face with junk food, they stuff their face with chocolate and sugars when they break the fast. I would tell you to stay away from these products. And I would tell you also to try and make sure you don't enter a caloric surplus. I'm not saying you to enter a deficit, but try and stay at maintenance. Try to actually, get just enough of what you need so that you will actually, properly fast. Do it the right way. And what you can do is, as you follow these advices, you will find also that the weight that you're going to gain, if you gain weight, but I doubt you will be quality, because too many people, and that's the problem with people who train during Ramadan, is not only are their performance not that good, but they end up losing weight, muscle mass, not necessarily weight, they gain fat, but they lose muscle mass and they lose performance and strength. And the reason why that is the case is because of what I just explained. You're overfeeding yourself, but all of those calories you consume right after the training because you train at night, so they don't feed the performance of the next training. So you're entering a cycle of low muscular stimulus and high caloric intake with a lot of those calories that are really bullshit calories. So you don't want that. Really try to avoid that. And it's the reason why the advice I just gave you is also sound. By starting with proteins, then eating good, clean carbs, you're going to find that you're not going to wake up at 2 a.m. to go for a snack. I'm not saying don't wake up throughout the night, but mostly to intake water if you can. You are going to find that it's going to keep you healthy, it's going to keep you more energetic. So, that being said, let us discuss again the after gym recovery just to finish it. As I said, you can wake up throughout the night if needed, and that might be a good time for you to take protein shakes if you feel like you haven't had enough protein, because the meal plan that I just described to you is mostly going to prioritize carbs because they give you a lot of water. So that's a thing that you can totally do. Make sure that you do that. Another thing that I recommend for you is vegetables. Don't ignore vegetables during Ramadan. I know, as I said, you're going to be attracted by something that is savory because when you fast all day, everything tastes amazing when you eat. But because everything tastes amazing when you eat, you don't need sugar or something really, salty. You can just focus on simple foods. And I recommend eating a lot of vegetables, especially salads, because they help you with water intake. Have a salad, have 2 salads throughout the night, and don't neglect your vegetables because they bring micronutrients. Too many brothers, they go throughout the day, they don't understand why they're so tired. And it's because their macros are here, their calories are here, and their micronutrients are here. Okay, you don't want to be low on that. It's really important. Even for your mental health and your clarity of mind. If you feel foggy throughout the day when you fast, there is a problem. And it's going to hinder your connection with the higher being as well. So don't let that happen. And that's going to be that for my advice for the people who are going to be doing Ramadan starting tomorrow. If you have any questions again, or if you want to share with people, do it in the comments. I'm sure a lot of people are going to discuss. And now I'm going to follow with Lent. So Lent is going to be similar in practice because you're going to be replacing, or at least you're going to completely take away a certain element in your diet, and that's going to be animal products and really lean proteins in general. So it's going to be a different challenge in reality because instead of being restricted in terms of calories, you're restricted in terms of macros. The thing is that it's really not that hard to get proteins from other sources. You can get it from beans, you can get it from whey protein if you need, if whey protein is acceptable, of course. And also, an aparté, anything I say here, if you think it's dubious and you're not sure, and you think it might break the fast, you can ask your priest or you can ask I forgot the name. It will come back to me, but you can ask the competent authority and they will get back to you, your imam, sorry. So yeah, make sure you do that if you're not certain, because I'm not super sharp on your religion, or at least not on the fasting aspect of it. So for Lent, as I say, you replace animal protein by something else. I mean, it might be a month where you're going to go vegan. It might be 40 days where you're going to go vegan. One thing I would say, however, is that just like with Ramadan, don't overdo it on carbs. Just because you don't have the satiating aspect of animal proteins doesn't mean that it's time to stuff your face. I really want to stress that out because just like with Ramadan, it's interesting to see that, and that's not necessarily a dig, but it is a critique. I know a lot of people who do Ramadan and they end up gaining weight, which makes no sense because the goal was to actually, suffer through the lack of food. And the problem is that if you wait for the last meal of the day to be your only meal, especially for people who just eat a big meal at the fast, you're going to prioritize high caloric foods that tend to not be the best for your health, and therefore it's going to create a vicious circle, as I said. So it's the same for Lent. Be careful with the carb intake, be careful with the sugar intake. Just because something else was taken away from you doesn't mean that you have to replace it by something that is going to make up for it. Optimally, you want to be at the same weight or lighter after your fast, after your fasting month. And that's going to be that. I also want to say that because it is supposed to be focused on the spiritual and on your own development, you don't want to stress out about progression too much. It's not going to be the month where you make the best gains, of course, but it's not necessarily a month where you're going to regress either or stagnate. You can still get momentum going. And that's the big thing I'm going to end with here. The big problem with this month is that a lot of people end up losing a ton of momentum when they enter them. And then when they try to get started again afterwards, they start slow because they gain bad weight, they're demotivated, they don't understand why their strength went to the dogs, all of which can be traced back to what I already described. So really your goal throughout those months would be to keep, a cruising speed high enough to carry momentum throughout the month without having to look at it, right? It's like autopilot for the car. It's the same speed, you're not touching the wheel, you're all good, it's just cruising through, it's cruise control. That way you can focus on something more important to you, and when you're out of that and you can go back to the real life, quote unquote, you're good. You have the momentum, you can keep progressing again. So the progression does this, maybe during Ramadan or Lent it does this, and then it does this again, so it's not an issue. And also it's going to help you not associate negative emotions to Ramadan and to Lent. I really want to stress that out. I know many people who are forced into doing these things. They don't want to do it, they do it because of the familiar pressure, the pressure of the country where they live. To me, it is a direct insult towards religion. Not everyone has the strength of mind to fast, and not everyone should. And Ramadan understands that perfectly. People are healed, pregnant women, they don't have to fast. But it also extends to a lot more people. So I'm going to leave you with that. If you do something, do it because you want to, and follow the advice I gave you today. Thank you for watching.